My beloved child, stop for a moment before you move on to whatever else is waiting for your attention today. What I am about to say was not thrown together carelessly for a general audience. It found you specifically at this specific hour, because something in your life is standing at the edge of a change, and I did not want you to miss the moment it actually begins. You did not open this by pure accident. Something quieter than chance drew your attention here. A pull you may not be able to fully explain, but one you felt strongly enough to pause and stay a little longer than usual. I want you to trust that instinct rather than dismiss it as nothing. It is not nothing. It is the beginning of something you have been waiting for longer than you have admitted, even to yourself. I know what the last stretch of your life has actually felt like, underneath whatever version of it you have shown to other people. Not the surface explanation you give when someone casually asks how you are doing, but the real weight sitting quietly beneath that answer. The nights you lay there turning the same worry over and over without resolution. The mornings you got up and moved through your responsibilities out of habit rather than genuine hope, because hope had cost you something painful before, and you had learned to keep your guard raised so the next disappointment would not land as hard as the last one did. I am not telling you today that everything will suddenly be easy. I am telling you something more specific and more grounded than that. Something is beginning right now, in this exact moment. Not tomorrow, not next month, not in some distant, indefinite future you cannot picture the edges of. Today, the turning point you have been quietly hoping for is not simply approaching from a distance. It has already started, even if the visible evidence of it has not fully caught up yet to what has already shifted underneath the surface of your life. I want to explain something about how change actually tends to work, because I think a great deal of your discouragement has come from expecting it to arrive differently than it actually does. Most people imagine a turning point as something dramatic and immediately obvious, a single moment where everything visibly transforms all at once. That is rarely how it happens. Far more often a shift begins quietly underneath the surface, in a place you cannot directly observe, long before it becomes visible in your circumstances. By the time you can actually see it with your own eyes, the deeper work has usually already been underway for some time. That is exactly where you are right now. The deeper work has already begun. You are simply about to start catching up to it, feeling it arrive gradually in your circumstances the way morning light gradually fills a room rather than switching on all at once like a single flipped switch. I want to speak honestly about the waiting you have already done, because I do not want to rush past it as though it did not matter. It mattered every difficult season you endured, every stretch of time where nothing seemed to move forward despite your best effort. Every moment you wondered whether anything would ever actually change. All of it was real, and none of it was wasted. Even though it may have felt that way while you were living through it, think about a seed placed into dark soil for a long stretch of time. Nothing visible happens above the ground. There is no obvious progress to point to, nothing that looks like movement from the outside. And yet underneath the surface the seed has already cracked open. Roots are extending outward, drawing up what they need, building the entire structure that will eventually support everything that becomes visible above ground later. If you dug that seed up halfway through the process just to check on it, you would destroy the very thing you were waiting to see grow. The waiting was never empty. It was necessary, even though it did not look like progress from where you were standing at the time. I want you to consider that your own waiting has worked the same way. Not empty, not evidence that you were overlooked or forgotten. Simply necessary, in a way that will only become fully clear once the visible results of it finally appear in your life. I want to speak plainly about the doubt that has likely crept in during this long stretch. The quiet questions you may not have said out loud to anyone. Whether you have been forgotten, whether other people seem to receive good things more easily while you continue waiting, whether the delay in your own life means something specific and discouraging about your worth. I want to address that doubt directly rather than let it sit unspoken underneath everything else. You have not been forgotten. Delay is not the same thing as denial, even though it can feel exactly the same in the middle of a hard season. When something you have hoped for takes longer to arrive than you expected, it does not mean the answer has been withheld from you permanently. It often means the conditions required to actually sustain that answer were still being put into place. Some things, if they arrive too early, before the proper foundation exists to hold them, do not last. They collapse under their own weight almost as soon as they appear, leaving behind more disappointment than the waiting itself ever caused. I would rather you receive something solid a little later than something fragile a little sooner. And that has been the reasoning behind more of your waiting than you may have realized. I want to talk now about the specific fear that you have somehow missed your window, that too much time has already passed, that the version of your life you once hoped for is no longer available to you because other opportunities have already gone to other people while you were still waiting your turn. I want to gently dismantle that fear as directly as I can. Time does not work the way that fear suggests it does. A delayed outcome is not automatically a canceled one. What is genuinely meant for you was never in competition with what has already gone to someone else, because it was never a shared, limited supply in the first place. It was shaped specifically around your own story, your own needs, your own particular path through life, and it remains available to you regardless of how much time has already passed. I want to speak now about what has actually been happening underneath the surface of your circumstances during this long season, because I think you deserve to understand it clearly rather than simply being told to keep waiting without explanation. Much of what felt like obstruction in your life was, in reality, protection in disguise. I know that can be difficult to accept, especially if parts of what you walked through caused genuine, lasting pain. I am not minimizing that pain or suggesting it did not matter. What I am telling you is that certain doors closed specifically because what waited on the other side of them would have cost you far more than you were able to see clearly at the time. Think about the paths you wanted so badly that never opened for you. The opportunities you pursued with everything you had that quietly fell apart despite genuinely deserving effort. I understand how frustrating that felt, how it made you question your own judgment, your own worth, even your own faith in whether anything good was actually coming for you. But some of those closed doors were not failures on your part. They were redirections, gently moving you away from situations that would have drained you, trapped you, or slowed your progress in ways you could not have predicted from where you were standing at the time. I want to talk honestly about comparison as well, because I suspect it has quietly shaped more of your discouragement than you have fully realized. It is almost impossible to avoid noticing other people's timelines, especially ones that appear to move more quickly or more easily than your own. Casual conversations, glimpses into other people's lives, even simple observations made from a distance, can all feed a persistent, low-grade feeling that you are somehow behind, that everyone else has figured out something you have not yet grasped for yourself. I want to gently take that feeling apart right now. What you observe on the surface of someone else's life rarely tells you the full story of everything they carried to get there. Their particular timeline was built for their particular path, shaped by circumstances unique to them, and it was never meant to be the measuring stick for your own life. Your own timeline has been shaped with just as much intention, even if it has looked completely different from anyone else's around you. Different is not the same thing as behind. It is simply different, built specifically around what you are actually meant to carry and become. I want to speak now about something I believe you have sensed quietly for a while, a restlessness that has very little to do with your circumstances being objectively terrible and everything to do with a feeling that you were made for something more specific than simply getting through each ordinary day. That restlessness is not ingratitude on your part. It is not you being difficult to satisfy. It is a signal, placed there intentionally, quietly pointing you towards something you have not yet fully stepped into. You do not need the entire picture today. You do not need to understand exactly how the coming months or years will unfold in precise detail. You only need the next visible step in front of you, whatever that specifically happens to be, the conversation you have been avoiding, the decision you have been putting off, the small, uncomfortable action that keeps quietly returning to your mind, no matter how many times you try to set it aside. What is genuinely meant for you rarely arrives as a finished, complete blueprint. It reveals itself gradually, one step at a time, and each step tends to illuminate the one that follows it, in a way that only becomes visible once you have actually taken the first one. I want to speak about resistance now because you may be encountering more of it recently than you have in previous seasons, and I want to offer a way of understanding it that does not immediately assume something has gone wrong. Sometimes resistance increases specifically because something meaningful is drawing closer, not because it is moving further away. Discouragement that feels unusually persistent, doubt that sounds louder than it has in a while, none of that automatically proves you have made a mistake or misjudged your circumstances. It can just as easily mean you are closer to a genuine breakthrough than you currently realize. And whatever has been working against your forward movement is making one final push before losing its grip on you entirely. I am not telling you this so that you interpret every hard day from here forward as some grand spiritual battle. Ordinary life remains genuinely difficult sometimes, in simple human ways that do not require a dramatic explanation. But I want you to hold this possibility gently, so that if resistance does show up during a season of real change, you do not automatically assume it proves nothing is actually happening. Sometimes the opposite turns out to be true. I want to talk now about something specific I want you to watch for in the coming days. Small, easily overlooked signs that something is genuinely shifting, rather than waiting only for something enormous and undeniable to prove that change has truly arrived. A conversation that goes noticeably better than you expected it to. A moment of unexpected calm arriving in the middle of an otherwise stressful day. A decision you finally managed to make after putting it off for months, without quite knowing why. A thought that used to spiral immediately into anxiety, that this time simply passes through your mind without fully taking hold of you. None of these individually look like a dramatic miracle on their own, but together, accumulated over time, they add up to a life that genuinely feels different from the one you have been living up until now. Pay close attention to those small, quiet shifts, rather than only watching for something dramatic and obvious. Meaningful transformation is almost always built from small, easily dismissed moments strung together patiently over time. If you only watch for something enormous, you risk missing the quieter, steadier evidence that something real is already underway beneath the surface of your ordinary days. I want to speak honestly about receiving good things after a long stretch of difficulty, because receiving well is often harder than people expect it to be. After enough disappointment, a person can develop an almost automatic discomfort with good news, a quiet suspicion that if something feels too good, it must be about to be taken away again, or that fully accepting it will somehow invite disaster. If any part of that discomfort feels familiar to you right now, I want to name it directly. You are allowed to receive good things without immediately bracing for them to disappear. You are allowed to enjoy relief without treating it as the beginning of the next disappointment. Receiving is its own kind of practice, and if it currently feels unfamiliar, that unfamiliarity simply means you have not had much recent opportunity to practice it. Not that something is fundamentally wrong with you. I want to speak plainly about the specific fear that you do not actually deserve the good things you have been quietly hoping for. Whether because of past mistakes, past failures, or simply a long habit of believing that good things happen to other people more easily than they happen to you. I want to address that fear directly rather than let it continue sitting unspoken underneath everything else. Worth was never something you had to earn through flawless performance. It was never contingent on having handled every hard season perfectly. It simply exists in you. Underneath all of that, whether or not you have fully believed it during your harder stretches, I know belief does not switch on instantly simply because someone states the truth clearly. Old doubts tend to linger even after your mind has intellectually accepted something different. That is a normal part of healing, not a sign you are doing something wrong. I am not asking you to manufacture instant confidence you do not genuinely feel. I am asking you to stay open to the possibility that the harshest things you have believed about yourself during your hardest moments were never as accurate as they felt at the time. I want to talk now about the people who have not yet entered your life, the ones still ahead of you on this road rather than behind you. Isolation, however long it has lasted, was never meant to be permanent. Some of the distance you have felt from others was not entirely accidental, and I want to be honest about that rather than pretend every difficult relationship in your past was simply bad luck. Certain connections that ended or faded were, in reality, holding you back more than helping you, even if they felt comfortable simply because they were familiar and predictable, rather than genuinely good for you. What is approaching you now looks different. People who will not feel threatened by your growth. People who will not require you to shrink yourself in order to make them feel secure around you. People who notice what is genuine in you rather than only what is convenient for them in the moment. These connections often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary conversations that only later reveal how significant they actually were. Pay attention to small, unremarkable moments in the days ahead. Meaningful connection rarely announces itself with fanfare. I also want to speak about relationships still carrying unresolved weight in your heart. Ones you have not fully closed the door on even though you stopped actively hoping anything would change. I will not promise you a tidy resolution where every broken relationship magically repairs itself, because that would not be an honest thing to say. And honesty matters more than easy comfort. But some situations you assumed were permanently finished are not as closed as they currently appear from where you are standing. I am asking you to hold that possibility loosely without demanding a specific outcome, but without shutting yourself off from it completely either. I want to speak now about the specific provision you have quietly worried about, whatever form that concern takes in your particular life right now. I want you to know that the gap between what you currently have and what you actually need is not too wide to close. Provision has a way of arriving through directions people rarely expect, through doors that were not on anyone's original list of likely possibilities. I am not asking you to know exactly how this will unfold in advance. I am asking you to remain open to the possibility that help is going to arrive in a shape you did not anticipate, rather than only the specific shape you have been picturing. I want to talk honestly about grief too, because I think much of what you have carried through this difficult season was not really bitterness, even when it looked that way from the outside. Underneath most of it was simple grief, for time that felt wasted, for versions of your life you once imagined that did not turn out the way you had hoped, for relationships that ended before you were ready for them to end. Grief deserves to be acknowledged honestly rather than rushed past toward forced positivity. I am not asking you to pretend it away. I am asking you to let it exist honestly, while allowing it slowly to soften you rather than harden you permanently. Grief and hope are able to occupy the same heart at the same time. You do not have to choose only one of them. I want you to consider something about the years that felt the most difficult. The ones where very little appeared to move forward no matter how much effort you invested. Growth is often invisible while it is actually happening. Something developing beneath the surface rarely looks like progress from where you are standing directly on top of it. If you look back honestly, even at your hardest seasons, you will likely find evidence that something in you was quietly strengthening the entire time, even during the stretches that felt purely like endurance rather than genuine movement forward. I want to be honest with you about something important as this message continues. Not everything ahead of you will be effortless simply because a difficult season is ending. Life continues to require real patience, real effort, and real choices from you moving forward. What is shifting is not that difficulty disappears entirely from your life, because that is simply not how life works for anyone, regardless of how much faith they carry. What is shifting is the weight underneath the difficulty, the sense of being fundamentally alone in carrying it, the belief that nothing you do will ever be enough to change your circumstances. That underlying heaviness is what is beginning to lift, even if ordinary challenges remain a normal part of an ordinary life going forward. I want to speak now about what specific ordinary days are likely to look like as this genuine change unfolds, because I do not want you imagining that a shift like this always has to look dramatic or immediately obvious the moment it begins. Most real change accumulates quietly, through small differences stacking gently on top of one another over time. Pay attention to those small, easily overlooked signs rather than waiting only for something enormous and undeniable to prove that anything has truly changed in your life. I want to remind you that healing rarely moves in a perfectly straight line. There will likely be days ahead, even during genuine forward movement, where old feelings resurface unexpectedly, where an old wound aches again briefly, where doubt tries to convince you that nothing has actually changed after all. That does not mean the progress you have made is not real. It simply means healing happens in layers, and revisiting an old feeling briefly does not erase the genuine growth that has already taken place underneath it. Be patient with yourself on harder days rather than treating them as proof that everything you have walked through has been for nothing. You are allowed to move forward slowly. You are allowed to experience good days and harder days within the same season without one canceling out the other. You are allowed to still be healing while genuinely growing at the same time. None of that makes you inconsistent or weak. It simply makes you human, walking through something real rather than performing a version of progress that looks flawless from the outside. I want to speak now about the specific temptation to give up right before things actually begin to shift visibly, because that particular moment, right before change becomes obvious, is often the hardest one to endure. It is the point where you have already invested so much patience and effort that continuing feels almost unbearable, while you still cannot see any concrete evidence that your effort is about to pay off. If you find yourself in that exact moment right now, I want you to know that the temptation to quit does not automatically mean you have misjudged your situation. It often simply means you are closer than the discouragement in front of you would suggest. This is not a guarantee of a specific timeline, but it is a genuine reason to keep going one more day, one more attempt, one more honest step forward, even without full certainty about exactly when relief will actually arrive. I want to speak plainly about forgiveness now, because I know it is one of the harder things anyone can be asked to consider, and I do not bring it up lightly or without understanding what it genuinely costs a person to extend it. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something did not hurt you, and it does not mean allowing someone back into your life who has shown no real change or accountability for their actions. It simply means loosening the grip that a past wound has over your present peace. You are able to release someone from your resentment without necessarily releasing them back into your daily life. Those are genuinely two separate decisions, and you are allowed to make one without automatically making the other. If there is a specific situation you have been quietly holding on to, even a low simmering resentment you rarely mention out loud, I want you to consider setting down a portion of that weight today, not because the original situation was fair, and not because the other person deserves your peace of mind more than you deserve your own freedom from continuing to carry it, simply because that resentment has likely been costing you more over time than it has been costing anyone else. And it is genuinely all right to let some of that responsibility rest elsewhere, instead of carrying it indefinitely on your own. I want to speak about gratitude for a moment, not as an obligation or performance, but as something genuinely useful moving forward. Gratitude tends to widen a person's ability to notice good things as they actually arrive, almost like adjusting your eyes to see more clearly in dim light after a long time spent in darkness. If you have spent a long season simply trying to survive, gratitude may have felt like an unaffordable luxury reserved for people whose lives seemed easier than yours. I want to gently invite you back toward it now, not as pressure to feel thankful for things that genuinely hurt you, but as a quiet practice of noticing whatever small good things are actually present in your life right now, even amid everything that remains difficult. I want to talk about legacy for a moment as well, because I think you have underestimated how far the effects of your own perseverance actually reach beyond your individual life. When you choose to keep trying rather than give up completely, when you choose patience over bitterness, when you choose to remain open rather than close yourself off entirely, that choice does not only affect you personally, it quietly shapes the people watching you. Sometimes people you are not even thinking about in the exact moment you make that choice. Your continued effort ripples outward in ways you may never fully witness yourself, and that matters more than it probably feels like it does on an ordinary difficult day. I want to speak plainly about self-compassion now, because I suspect you have been harder on yourself throughout this entire season than you would ever be towards someone else facing the exact same circumstances. If a friend came to you carrying everything you have carried, you would likely extend them patience, understanding, and grace without a second thought. I want you to consider extending that same patience toward yourself. You are allowed to have struggled. You are allowed to have made choices you now view differently in hindsight. You are allowed to still be figuring things out, even at your current stage of life, even after everything you have already lived through. Growth does not have a deadline, and neither does healing. I want to close by returning to where this began, reminding you that none of what you have read here happened by accident. The timing of when this message reached you, the fact that you stayed with it this long, the quiet stirring you may be feeling right now even if you cannot fully name it, all of it points towards something genuine taking place inside you, not simply words passing through your attention on an ordinary day. Whatever season you have been walking through, however long it has lasted, however heavy it has felt, it is genuinely shifting now, not because your circumstances have magically resolved themselves overnight, but because something inside you has been quietly strengthened through everything you have endured, and that strength is exactly what the next chapter of your life will actually require. You do not need every answer today. You do not need to know exactly how the coming months will unfold in precise detail. You only need to take the next honest step in front of you. whatever small or large thing that happens to be for you right now, and trust that the step after it will become visible once you have actually moved. That has always been enough, even during your hardest seasons, even when it did not feel like enough at the time. It remains enough today as well. Before you go, I want to leave you with a few simple, practical things worth holding on to in the days ahead, because insight alone rarely sustains a person through an ordinary, difficult afternoon when old feelings resurface unexpectedly. Notice the small things first, not the enormous, undeniable proof you may be waiting for, but the quiet, easily overlooked moments that suggest something is genuinely shifting. Give yourself permission to rest without guilt attached to it. Rest is not laziness, and it is not evidence that you are falling behind everyone else. Be patient with the parts of you that heal more slowly than others. Some wounds close relatively quickly. Others take much longer, resurfacing occasionally even after most of the pain has genuinely passed. That uneven pace does not mean you are doing something wrong. Keep speaking honestly, both to yourself privately and where it feels safe to do so, to people who genuinely care about you. Isolation tends to make everything feel heavier and more permanent than it actually is. Even small, honest conversations tend to lighten a weight that silence alone only continues to compound over time. And finally, keep returning to this quiet, steady truth for as long as you genuinely need it. You were not abandoned during the hardest parts of your story, and you are not being abandoned now as something new quietly begins to take shape. Whatever this next season holds for you, you will not be walking through it any more alone than you were walking through the last one. Even during the moments it felt that way, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop just slightly from wherever they have been holding tension without you fully noticing it. You have made it through every single day up to this one, without exception, even the days you were certain you could not. That track record means something real. Carry it with you gently into whatever comes next, one honest step at a time, for as long as it takes to feel solid beneath your feet again. There is one final thought I want to leave with you before this closes, because I think it ties everything else together in a way that might make the whole message easier to carry once you step away from it. What is beginning today is not conditional on you having everything figured out first. It does not require you to feel completely ready, completely confident, or completely free of doubt before it can start. It simply requires you to remain open, even a small amount more than you were before you started reading this, to the quiet possibility that something genuinely good is already unfolding for you, even in ways you cannot fully see or measure yet. That openness alone is enough for today. Tomorrow will likely look fairly ordinary. You will probably return to familiar responsibilities, familiar conversations, familiar patterns of thought. That is normal, and it does not mean anything shared here has failed to matter. Real change rarely announces itself through one dramatic before and after moment. It tends to arrive through small, repeated choices made consistently across many ordinary days that look almost identical to the ones before them. So when tomorrow arrives, and it feels like an entirely normal day rather than some obviously transformed one, remember that ordinary days are exactly where real change actually takes root. Not in dramatic moments of realization, but in the quiet, repeated choice to keep believing something better is possible, even when the day in front of you looks unremarkable. Wherever you are reading this, whatever room, whatever moment of your day this happens to be, let it settle into you fully before you move on to whatever comes next. You are not required to feel completely different immediately. You are simply invited to remain a little more open than you were before, trusting that what has already begun will continue to unfold, patiently, one honest day at a time, starting from right now. There is more I want to say before this closes fully, because a single ending thought rarely carries a person through an entire season of genuine change. So stay a little longer, even if part of you feels ready to move on now that you have heard something reassuring. Reassurance is a good beginning, but it is not the whole of what today is meant to offer you. I want to talk about the specific weight of carrying something quietly for a long time, without anyone around you fully understanding its size. There is a particular kind of loneliness in that, one that has nothing to do with being physically alone and everything to do with feeling unseen even while surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. You have likely smiled through conversations while carrying something heavy underneath, not out of dishonesty, but because explaining the full depth of it felt exhausting, or because you were not sure anyone would actually understand, even if you tried. I want you to know that being misunderstood by people who love you does not mean you have been truly alone in what you carried. It simply means human understanding has limits, even within good and caring relationships. Every version of your story that never found the right words, every feeling too complicated to explain in a normal conversation, none of it went unnoticed. It was known fully, even in the moments you felt most invisible to everyone around you. I want to speak now about the small, quiet acts of resilience you have shown that likely went completely unrecognized by anyone else. The mornings you got up anyway, even when everything in you wanted to stay under the covers, the responsibilities you kept fulfilling even while feeling emotionally depleted, the kindness you continued extending to other people even during weeks when you had very little kindness left over for yourself. None of that was small. It takes real strength to keep functioning while carrying real weight, and that strength deserves acknowledgement, even if you have rarely given it to yourself. I want to talk honestly about anger as well, because I think some of what you have carried was not only grief or fear, but genuine anger, at situations that felt unfair, at people who let you down, at a version of your life that did not unfold the way you once expected it to. Anger is not automatically wrong or unfaithful. It is often simply evidence that something mattered deeply to you, that a real hope was genuinely disappointed. I am not asking you to suppress that anger or pretend it does not exist. I am asking you to let it exist honestly, without letting it become the permanent lens through which you view everything ahead of you. I want to talk about the version of yourself that existed before certain hard seasons changed you, because I suspect there are days you quietly miss that earlier version, the one who trusted more easily, who worried less about being hurt again, who had not yet learned to brace for disappointment before it even arrived. I want to offer you a different way of viewing that earlier self. You are not required to return to exactly who you were before, as though everything you have lived through since then was simply damage that needs undoing. Some of what you have become through hardship is genuinely more solid than what existed before it, even if it does not always feel that way in quieter, more vulnerable moments. I want to address the fear of hoping again after being disappointed too many times, because that fear makes complete sense given everything you have walked through. Hope that has been crushed repeatedly starts to feel dangerous, almost reckless, like setting yourself up deliberately for more pain. I understand why guarding against that feels safer than continuing to hope openly, but I want to gently challenge the idea that protecting yourself from hope entirely is actually protecting you from anything real. A life lived without any hope at all is not actually safer. It is simply smaller, and you were never meant to shrink your life permanently because certain seasons hurt you deeply. I am not asking you to hope recklessly, ignoring genuine warning signs or real patterns from your past. I am asking you to leave a small amount of room even now for the possibility that not everything you hope for is destined to be disappointed the way some of your past hopes were. Some of what you are hoping for now is genuinely going to arrive, and I would rather you notice it clearly when it does than have trained yourself so thoroughly against hope that you cannot recognize a real answer even standing directly in front of you. I want to speak now about what it means to actually trust a process you cannot fully see the end of yet. Trust like that is difficult, especially for someone who has learned through hard experience that things do not always work out the way they were hoped to. I am not asking for blind trust that ignores reality or refuses to acknowledge genuine difficulty. I am asking for a steadier kind of trust, one that can hold both truths at once, that things are genuinely hard right now, and that something meaningful is still unfolding underneath the difficulty, even before it becomes fully visible. That kind of trust is built slowly, through small moments of choosing to keep going, even without complete certainty, rather than through one dramatic decision made once and never revisited again. Every time you choose to keep showing up despite uncertainty, that trust becomes a little sturdier, a little more able to hold you steady the next time doubt returns, as it likely will at some point along the way. I want to talk about patience for a moment, not as passive waiting, but as an active, ongoing choice to keep moving forward, even when results are not immediately visible. Patience is often misunderstood as simply enduring without complaint, but real patience involves continued effort alongside continued waiting. It means still showing up, still trying, still taking small steps forward, even while the larger outcome remains unclear. That kind of patience is far more demanding than passive waiting, and it deserves genuine respect rather than being dismissed as simply doing nothing while time passes. I want to speak honestly about setbacks as well, because I do not want to suggest that once real change begins, everything moves forward smoothly without any further difficulty. Setbacks are a normal part of almost every meaningful process of growth, not evidence that the growth itself was never real to begin with. If you experience a setback during this season, even after genuinely believing something had shifted, resist the urge to interpret that setback as proof that nothing actually changed. Growth is rarely a straight upward line. It tends to move forward with occasional dips and pauses along the way, and those dips do not erase the genuine progress made before them. I want to talk about identity for a moment, because I think a great deal of what has weighed on you connects back to quiet uncertainty about who you actually are underneath your circumstances, your job, your relationships, your daily responsibilities. It is easy to let external circumstances define your sense of self, especially during long seasons of struggle, when it can feel like your entire identity has narrowed down to simply surviving whatever is currently in front of you. Circumstances shift constantly, but the core of who you actually are has remained steady underneath all of it, even during the seasons that felt most destabilizing. I want to speak about community as well, because I think isolation has likely made everything feel heavier than it needed to feel. Even a small amount of genuine connection, a single honest conversation, a single relationship where you do not have to perform constant strength, can meaningfully lighten a burden that feels unbearable when carried entirely alone. If you have been isolating yourself even unintentionally during this difficult season, consider reaching toward at least one person you trust, even in a small way. Vulnerability feels risky, especially after being hurt before, but genuine connection rarely happens without some degree of that risk. I want to close this extended reflection by speaking directly to whatever specific fear or doubt is loudest in you right now. In this exact moment, as you continue reading, whatever that particular fear is, whether it concerns your finances, your relationships, your health, your sense of purpose, or something else entirely, fear does not have final authority over what actually happens next in your life. Fear is loud, and it often feels urgent and convincing, but it is not always accurate, and it is not always predictive of what will genuinely unfold. You are allowed to feel that fear honestly while still choosing to take the next step forward despite it, rather than waiting for the fear to disappear completely before you are willing to move. So take one more slow breath before you close this message and move forward into whatever comes next in your day. You have carried enough for long enough. Something lighter is genuinely allowed to begin now, even quietly, even gradually, even before you can fully explain everything that has shifted inside you. Something has changed, and you are allowed to let yourself believe that one honest step at a time, for as long as it takes to feel solid beneath your feet again. There is one final thread I want to leave with you, because I think it ties everything else together in a way that might make the whole message easier to carry once you step away from it. Everything shared here rests on one simple assumption: that you are worth this much attention, this much care, this much patience extended toward your own healing. I know that assumption may feel uncomfortable to sit with, especially if you have spent a long time believing you needed to earn attention and care through constant achievement or constant usefulness to other people. You are not required to prove your worth through performance in order to deserve rest, healing, or good things arriving in your life. Worth is not a reward given out for flawless behavior. It exists underneath performance entirely, present even during your least productive, least impressive seasons. Present even on the days you feel furthest from who you want to be. I want to leave you with a simple, honest picture to hold on to in the weeks ahead. Picture yourself a year from now, looking back at this exact moment, at this exact message, remembering the specific season you are currently walking through. Imagine that future version of yourself being able to say honestly that something did shift after this, not necessarily instantly, not necessarily dramatically, but genuinely, over time, through a series of small, deliberate choices that gradually built into something solid. That future is not guaranteed simply by reading these words once and moving on immediately. It requires continued, ordinary effort from you, day after day, in ways that will rarely feel significant in the moment they happen. But it is genuinely available to you starting from wherever you currently stand, regardless of how far behind or how stuck you might feel right now. Remember, one final time, that you have already survived every difficult day up to this exact point in your life, without a single exception. That fact alone deserves more credit than you likely give it in your quieter, more discouraged moments. Whatever specific difficulty you are currently facing, you already have direct evidence, built from your own lived experience, that you are capable of enduring hard things and eventually finding your way through them. Even when you cannot yet see exactly how that will happen this time, carry that evidence with you gently as you move forward from this moment. Not as pressure to perform resilience perfectly, but as a quiet, steady reminder available to you whenever doubt returns, as it likely will at some point along the way. You have made it through everything so far. That is not a small thing, and it is not something you need to minimize or dismiss, simply because the road ahead still looks uncertain. Let this be the moment you choose to keep walking forward gently. Honestly, one small step at a time, trusting that the next step will become visible once you have actually taken this one. That has always been enough to keep moving forward, even during your hardest seasons, and it remains enough today as well. I want to say one more thing about tomorrow, because I do not want you closing this message and immediately expecting a life that looks entirely different the moment you wake up. Real change rarely reveals itself that way. Tomorrow will likely look ordinary. You will probably return to familiar responsibilities, familiar conversations, familiar routines. That ordinariness does not mean nothing has shifted. It simply means the shift is beginning at the level where all lasting change actually begins, quietly underneath the surface before it becomes visible in your circumstances. If you wake up tomorrow and everything looks the same as it did yesterday, do not let that discourage you. Look instead for the smaller signs. A slightly lighter step, a little more patience than you expected to have, a moment where you catch yourself hoping again without immediately talking yourself out of it. Those small signs are not insignificant. They are often the very first evidence that something real has begun, arriving quietly before anything dramatic follows behind it. I also want to remind you that you are allowed to move through this season imperfectly. You do not need to respond to everything shared here with flawless faith or unwavering confidence. You are allowed to still feel afraid sometimes. You are allowed to still doubt occasionally, even while genuinely believing something good is coming. Faith and doubt are able to exist in the same heart without canceling each other out completely. What matters most is not the complete absence of doubt, but your willingness to keep taking the next honest step even while doubt is still present. So let this settle into you now gently, without pressure to feel a certain way immediately. Something has genuinely begun today. Not because of anything dramatic that happened while you were reading this, but because you stayed, because you remained open, because some part of you was willing to consider that something good might actually be unfolding for you even before you can fully see it. That willingness matters more than you likely realize, and it is enough to carry you forward one honest step at a time into whatever comes next.